you talked about that this weekend, the Gen X. Gen X? Yes, you did. You talked about how
how I missed the 90s.
You missed the 90s.
Yeah.
But I don't know I feel like there was more of a distinction maybe when I was younger, or maybe I feel like there's more of a conversation now around generations than there has been in the past.
Yeah, that's true.
But do you think it's because...
It feels true.
Do you think it's because of technology? Or what is it?
Why technology?
Because we were talking about it before, like the rise of the World Wide Web or the internet, whichever side you're on with this, and MySpace. And there's this kind of interconnected thing that has happened, and I think it's shaping a generation.
Like the introduction of the internet kind of created like that huge gap between generations. Because there's people who've grown up with it.
Yeah.
Then there's people who knew what it was like before it, but are kind of okay, they're okay, can bridge it. And then there's some people that just can't bridge it at all. So it's like a vast disconnection between generations.
Yeah, I think that's probably it, actually. That's a guess. I'm no sociologist or anthropologist, but I would say my guess would be that probably the acceleration of technological development creates a broader divide, because some people are, digital natives and others are not. And so there's probably an increasing, people are growing up in wildly different ways. Whereas before, it probably wasn't that different.
No.
I mean, I would think, you could probably make that argument going back about 150 years or so. But then before that, most people's upbringings are relatively, but technologically speaking,
there's technological advancements that
you don't have one group of people growing up with an iPhone and other people that aren't.
And agriculture kind of did the same. So any advance in technology is really the point where you can say there's a shift in this generational experience. Agriculture, the invention of the what is it, like Henry Ford?
When you're saying agriculture?
So where people, you didn't have to be a farmer. Like there was a
you going all the way back to like hunter-gatherer?
So there were 5 occupations back in the day. You were a farmer, you were a preacher, you were in the government. But then there became this expansion of opportunity where you didn't have to do what your father did. You could go do something else. And then with Henry Ford and the invention of the assembly line, that all changed everything, where you're a specifically good at one thing. You're no longer a generalist, but you're really. So anyway, just thinking about how that changes the human experience.
Yeah.
And then if you zoom forward a little bit, thinking about how technology is shifting the generational experience even more because we're advancing so quickly. Anyway.
Were those occupations, or is that like your own conclusions, or is that from a book somewhere?
It's so Dallas Willard used to, because he was a philosophy professor. He used to have a question that he would ask his philosophy students. If this is the life that if you're one of these occupations, what does it mean? I'm going to mess up this question. But it was centered around these 5 specific occupations that they were supposed to kind of, think about and respond to in his philosophy class.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was curious how those got broken down.
And then there's Andy Crouch, who kind of talks about this generational, and he talks specifically about agriculture and mathematics and how there's a shift.
What book?
It wasn't in a book. It was actually in a talk that he gave.
Wow.
Yeah. Very interesting.
Yeah.
But there is a book, I cannot remember the author's name, but it's called Generations, and it's by a woman who has very intently studied like the shift in generations, the different beliefs that they have.
Oh, wow.
And how like much more acclimated they are to traditional family values, or like inclined to, and then okay with saying, oh, you don't need to, the nuclear family isn't that important.
Wow.
So
Is this a Christian book or no?
I don't think so, but it's called Generations. So
that could be an interesting read. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. So what you're talking about this past weekend is this idea of a relay race. And like handing off, passing the baton to the next generation and doing it well. And I think when we think about this conversation of generations, how there used to be this span in time, like people's experience from one generation to another was more similar than it is even now. And so how do we do that well? How do we relate to the people who came before us and the people who are coming after us?
That's a great question. I think two things come to my mind. One, it's going to require a lot of humility and honor as well, willingness to honor. We could talk more about that. I think the beginnings of it are just determining that that's something you want to do. And even recognizing that that's I think just sort of for us breaking ourselves, and probably the younger you are, just a guess, but the younger you are, probably the more the world you've grown up in is sort of aimed at, hardwired for putting you at the center of the story. Because just increasingly our advertising has moved in that direction. And I would say even increasingly from just a social standpoint, we're less inclined toward family, less inclined toward communal obligation, more inclined to the good of the individual. Although it's been interesting in the last, I think COVID sort of strangely turned those categories upside down, as people who would maybe more generally or more what would I say, frequently sort of advocate for the individual's rights over and against the community, then became people who said, actually, we want that for the good of the community, we must wear this mask, or we must be It's an interesting switch of roles as then people who more historically had argued for the good of the whole were arguing for the like individual
rights,
the individual rights of, you can't make me do that. And it was a fascinating role reversal how that's happened. Even continually on some of the debate that's gone on around like compelled speech and speech laws and things like that. It's like folks who would probably tend less toward valuing or wanting to hold together the traditional view of family and community, are advocating for limited speech that for the good of the whole, which is more of a communal preference to the other side, which is advocate, which would be more historically for the good of the whole, advocating for individual freedom of speech. So it's been interesting, but all that just to say, those two, I think those two positions, not necessarily left and right, but the positions of the good of the individual versus the good of the group. And as we've tended more toward kind of individual in some sense, there's sort of a loss of connection, let's say, or even an awareness of connection to who came before me. It's easier to sort of roll our eyes at generations previous to us, to mock, laugh, whatever, act as though they're so uninformed or kind of Neanderthals or whatever.
Yeah, it's kind of C.S. Lewis's chronological snobbery idea.
There you go. Yeah. We're so much more evolved or advanced or tolerant or whatever the case may be. These people are fearful of change and progress and all that kind of stuff. You get a lot of that. And so even just acknowledging, I think it goes both ways. Like I think it is probably the older that you are, acknowledging that life isn't isn't just about your own success, personal advancement, achievement of your own dreams or goals, particularly from a Christian point of view. It's just we're not called by God to ever be these dead ends, like a cul-de-sac of awesomeness over here that doesn't impact anybody else.
Yeah.
So God blessed Abraham, I'll make your name great so that you'll be a blessing. The idea is that the blessing of God, what God does in you, he does through you. I talked about that this weekend. So there's this kind of emanating, resonating, outward, advancing. You see that in the Great Commission. I'm kind of thinking about talking about that this weekend. But this idea that, again, that this isn't meant to stay here. Jerusalem, Judea, ends of the earth, what you read about in Acts 1:8 from Christ to his disciples. So is this advancing idea, it's moving beyond you. No, this isn't just, stay here and enjoy the knowledge that you knew the Messiah, but rather spread this out. So there's that idea that what God does in us and is meant to pass through us. So it's taking on that posture. I think just one, admitting, oh wow, yeah. I mean, if I'm really pulling the thread apart, or the whatever, unraveling all this, I think it, first of all, just acknowledging or realizing that God's been up to something from the beginning, that God is doing more than just sort of overseeing, like a referee, a game of people running around and making sure that we're not breaking too many rules. But if rather you see God as the center of the biblical story and mankind as a part of all of that, woven right into it, then it changes kind of fundamentally how you think about your life, how you think about everything, particularly in America with the idea of the American dream and it being about you and all of this. So start there, then realize that so God's doing something bigger than you, and then it's going to connect and go on to a generation after you. Then it's just a whole mindset shift that hopefully we started to think about this weekend. And then I think, like I said, humility. I have something to learn. I have something to pick up from the people around me, maybe even particularly those who are older than me. That doesn't mean that everyone older than me is wiser than me, but I think that does mean that I think it's just a posture that we have to take with each other. It's just like, I want to hear what you have to say, even though I might not agree with everything. I do want to honor you in that. And so there's a honor and humility that go along with all this, I think makes that possible.
Yeah, because ultimately you are sitting in the middle of something that someone else built.
Yeah.
And you don't, and to think you're an end in yourself is to almost say, well, all of this is for me, and I don't have any responsibility to take what someone built and make it better.
Yeah.
And not and that might mean tearing down some of the things that aren't healthy or good, but it also means okay, taking what is and saying that God knew what he was doing when he said this is good, and when men and women get involved, it's very good. And so stewarding this story really well. So you talked a little bit about this, but I'm wondering, do you have any more thoughts on radical individualism?
Oh, man.
That characterizes our moment in culture right now?
I mean, I hate to say, but not off the top of my head. I mean, it's a massive issue. It's not something I came prepared to talk about. Sorry.
No, you're fine. I mean, I'm just.
Do you have any thoughts?
I might not. I just think about, as you're continuing to talk, and generations, just even the word generation has a plurality to it. There's a group identity where everyone is, they think these are the things that characterize not just me, but us. And so within a church context, if somebody comes in and radical individualization has infiltrated them, how would they go about, I don't know, joining in the work that God is already doing?
Well, so I think part of it is having the humility to admit that your perspective is not the full perspective. And I think that's a hard thing. It's hard, particularly, and I know this all too well because I worked with my dad for a long time. So we have different perspectives on things. And there are things still to this day that I would disagree with my dad about. That's and I think that can totally exist in a healthy relationship. There's nothing wrong with that. But then there are other things that I did disagree with him about. But now, the longer I've done this, the more I see where he was coming from. And that's the hard part about it is admitting and owning that that maybe your personality preferences, the way you view the world, the things you value, filter out what you see and don't see. And it can be hard, I think, get married and you understand this. It can be hard to understand why someone would think a certain way or whatever. I so many times, Heather and I are wired up pretty differently, and so many arguments, particularly early on, I didn't understand the difference between, I'm a thinker on the, if we're getting personality types here, Myers-Briggs, and she's a feeler. And feelers are kind of like this values-based. I don't want to go too far because one, I'm not an expert in this, and two, I'm not a feeler. But it's more of a values-based kind of, I feel this, and there's a value there that needs to be acknowledged. I'm a thinker, which is more kind of like logical sequence and reason, and it doesn't make me so there would be disagreements that we would have where she's feeling a certain way, maybe devalued, not heard in our marriage, but logically I can lay out a case why her feelings are invalid. But that doesn't make her feelings go away. Well, like like you're spending too much money. Okay, well, let me show you how much I've spent, or let me show you and it's taken me like 20 years to figure out that she's not looking for a spreadsheet to explain away. What's frustrating to someone like me is that, but then why do your feelings get to just trump facts? Or why do the way, but it's just wanting to be heard, I think, and acknowledged and not explained away. My point in all that is that's personality difference. And then there's generational perspective as well that weighs into it. So when it can just be easy to sort of echo chamber in my own head and go, but I'm right. Yeah. And according to all the information that I have, the perspective that I have is absolutely right. But I think if I could inhabit another person's perspective and experience, I might go, oh, there's other information here that I'm not aware of.
Okay, so maybe you did get to the kind of idea that I was circling around with radical individualism, because if you can prove that you're always right, you could be very happy to be always right and completely alone. And so the point isn't that you would prove yourself right and that you would say, this is who I am, as an individual, and be able to kind of build up this armor around yourself, but to move towards another person in relationship, to make the person bigger than whatever problem you're facing. Or the
relationship bigger, right?
Yes, the relationship
I'm
bigger.
I'm committed to you through this, even though we see this differently. And that's where I'm saying, there's a humility in that you have to be willing to just, lay down instead of fighting for your territory.
Yeah. Because if we want to build something with God that's good
or
and
with each other. Yeah, that's the other thing.
We have to do it together.
Is how can I build something with a person that I disdain, that I despise, that I don't understand in any way? There has to be some appreciative. I appreciate your perspective. And I've come to this point with Heather. I've been there for a long time, but I've had to also work to develop this, is to appreciate her feelings and perspectives that just I can't run them through the same logic filter in my mind, but that doesn't mean I can then just discard them. That's a recipe for a terrible relationship. Yeah. And I've learned that, but that took me a while because to me, the filter in my head just made sense, and I couldn't understand why if explained, that was so many of our early arguments were me trying to explain to her.
Yeah.
Okay, let me walk this through with you again. Here's 1 + 1. The way it was explained to me, thinker feeler is like, to a thinker, it's like 1 + 1, watch this, equals 2. And feelers are going, no, it's 3. And you're like, how?
Yeah.
Where is the other? And they can't tell you, they can't even always explain, but there's a value that's invisible.
Yes. Yeah.
That's there, that they feel and sense that I cannot see very easily and don't take into account. And so that's why for Heather and I was like, it's literally like just banging 2 brick walls together or whatever.
Yeah.
We're not getting anywhere. And I finally over years learned that continuing to just try to explain that is never going to work.
No, so I went to an emotional intelligence workshop.
Oh, great.
And it was so good. But it talked about the how we have these needs for physical safety and psychological, social safety, and how it might not be. So there's like a pie chart. And within this pie chart, if one of these things feels like it's being compromised, then we go into this kind of like hijacked state where we're defensive, we feel threatened. And it's if we don't feel like we're being included, if we don't feel like the person is respecting us or feels like we're competent in that. So it's not just physical, but there's all these different facets and components that, man, if you cross that line or that barrier, that person is going to be like, whoa, you know? And
that explains a lot of my marriage. Because my default position is, this is right.
Yeah.
Duh.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I could be pretty condescending.
Yeah.
Because
So
just to me, it's
be,
so like, how do we not get here?
Yeah.
This is obviously, what are you doing?
And she could be feeling like, well, you're not including me in the process or respecting or whatever that might be.
Yeah.
So anyway.
Wow. Okay. You're giving me some good homework today.
I found it really helpful.
Yeah.
And I think it could be helpful in the generations conversation. If you think about being on 2 sides of a bridge,
right.
Like you're on this side, they're on this side, and the bridge is out.
Right, right.
And how do you get them to come over to your side of the bridge? You have to go to their side first.
Right.
And understand, what are they feeling? Are they feeling included?
Right.
Are they feeling respected?
Right.
And
starts there.
Yeah.
For sure.
And understanding them and then inviting them over to see your perspective. But a lot of times people aren't going to want to hear your perspective until they themselves feel heard.
You can't lead with, let me tell you why you're wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think learning to appreciate, I think that's the interesting thing. I mean, I'm pastoring a congregation filled with people of different generations, and I'm sure, and I'm very strategic about this, kind of admitting some of my, what would you call them, trade secrets here, but I am very careful how and what I say about things, because I know that if we could get kind of on a one-on-one level, we'd have many disagreements. I choose not to focus on those things. I know what my certain segments of my congregation value, and I am careful to affirm the areas in which we agree. And I really don't talk much about the areas where we disagree in terms of directly going at them. And so I'm thoughtful about that, because you're not going to be able to lead a group of people that you're alienating. And so I think for me, stepping into, this role with maybe some different views or whatever that other people have, it's like my job is not to come in and correct everybody. My job is to sort of lovingly kind of encouraging them toward Jesus.
Yeah.
And I think for me, where I rest in all of that is just going, I'm not the one that has to sort all this out in the end. They have their perspective, I have mine.
Yeah.
It's not up to me to try to, like, with every single issue. Big stuff we talk about, but smaller stuff I just don't go down into. It's not worth it. And so, Yeah, I think that's up to the Lord. I'm not going to get into all of that.
I think the Holy Spirit's going to do a lot of that work, especially when, you're preaching the gospel, you're going through scripture, and a lot of times that's
my confidence.
Yeah, that's going to reveal the intents of people's hearts and do so much more of the heavy lifting than we could ever do.
That's what I'm banking on.
Yeah. So you talked this weekend about kind of, I think about it in terms of getting stuck.
Okay.
If you want to move forward,
you
have to leave something behind.
Mm-hmm.
And I really appreciated those 3 points that you brought out.
Good. Thank you.
Talking about repressing your past, practically speaking.
Okay.
What if you know? So, I've heard a lot of people say, "Well, I get angry. That's just the way I am.
Yeah.
I'm that kind of person." But
you don't know why.
But that I would say that there's probably some undealt with pain from the past that is popping up when your like buttons get pushed just the right way. What would you say to somebody who's never like done any of that work? Where do they even start?
Well, some of it, I think that's a great question. I think some of it could be past.
Yeah.
I think some of it could be, it's probably technically past because it began in the past, but I think some of it is just, we just don't understand the reasons for why we do what we do.
Yeah.
So some of the habitual. So the way I think of it is, I think we can say we believe one thing, but our actions belie a different truth.
A deeper core
belief that we go to when we feel a certain way, threatened, insecure, embarrassed, whatever the case may be. And a lot of times those behaviors are, they're, what do I call them? They're sin. Let's just say they're at odds with the way we're told to respond or to live or to treat other people or whatever. And so while we would say, yes, I believe X, Y, Z, it's all wrong or whatever, but our core beliefs are telling us, no, we actually don't believe that loving your enemies works.
Yeah.
Or I think I'll be hurt if I forgive. Or I think that anger gets me what I want. So we can say that. So what happens for a lot of folks is we have certain habitual actions that then we feel bad about after the fact. And then we want to apologize for our guilt, but we don't ever bother to try to understand what started it in the first place and try to deal with the root of it. So I think that can be and often is caused by probably some pain or something that's happened in the past, but also some of it is just, I think it just could be, I don't know, a personality issue or a way that, we've dealt with things. I can think I don't exactly know why it is. I just remember sixth grade, playing in a basketball game and feeling embarrassed and starting to lash out at my teammates as a way of deflecting. I didn't understand it then. It was a way of deflecting my own embarrassment onto them, my own shame onto them. And that continued well into my 20s and probably early 30s before I started realizing kind of a pattern. And maybe I need to, I think there's two things. I think one, I can either, I don't have try as of might, I can't come up with a reason why I do it. It could just be a personality flaw or necessarily something the way that I'm wired, or maybe it's just who knows? I don't know. What I do know is that it's a pattern, and then I see it there, and then I can start to go, okay, that needs to be checked before it gets going. So for me, practically, a lot of times that came out playing sports, and unfortunately, I don't play sports like that anymore, only because I'm older and I just don't do it as anymore because my body won't allow me to, but or I just choose not to, but. Point is, the last few years that I was playing, I had to actively work I would compliment people that beat me. I had to really work to, like, say, great shot, man, good block, great defense. That was hard for me to do because I wanted to blame other people or them or whatever, get mad at them. Instead of that, I would actively go out of my way to start complimenting the people around me that I was competing against, as a way of kind of keeping my own tendencies in check.
That's so good, because I think about Romans 12. Be not conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And a lot of times people will find themselves in this cycle of like, man, I keep doing the same thing over and over again. I wish I didn't do that. And then they have the guilt and they come to God and they repent and maybe read a Bible verse and say, you know what, next time, I'm not going to be angry. Angry does not produce the righteousness of God, blah, blah, blah. But what you did was intentionally move against your tendency. So it's one thing to say that you believe the Bible. It's a completely different thing to actually apply it in a practical way by saying, man, good shot, and encouraging your brother.
Or making yourself apologize when you don't want to. Like,
absolutely.
Stuff like that. The more regularly you can do those things, the more you're, in some sense, crucifying your flesh. And making it to where I think you're curbing those desires moving forward. Now, I think there's also another part of this that is what I might call, like, I don't know, familial revelations. You realize something maybe had some, and this happened to me, and I'm not going to go into it because it's too personal to share, and I wouldn't want to talk about it. But I had something like this happen to me in the last 6 years. I don't remember, 5 years ago, something like that. A certain realization, not about any abuse or anything like that, but just an internal, oh, wow, that's why I've been responding this way. And it was kind of a family of origin thing. You could say it kind of goes way back. And it wasn't anything I needed to confront anybody over or sit down and have a conversation with. I just needed to realize I've been responding. I don't want to call it, I guess you could call it inappropriately, but I haven't been responding the way that I should.
Yeah.
Because of an ongoing fear that I'd been holding on to, that I needed to let go of. And not all at once, but what I can tell you is this. The realization of that, and I really felt like it was, I don't know, the Holy Spirit kind of working in me. That was just like a word that I cannot I can't get it out of. It's in there. Like I remember the moment vividly when I said certain words to myself, and it was like an oh my goodness. And when I said it, it was kind of like a weight was lifted off my shoulders. It didn't make all of it go away immediately, but what it did do is kind of reframed the way I needed to respond going forward in certain situations and relationships that I needed to adjust. And it was built on, and so the way that it happened is it came through a kind of, how would I call it, retelling, working through just sort of history. And you realize, and sometimes, I guess what I'm saying is sometimes when we allow ourselves, and there are certain, in this case, it was a particular exercise that I was going through with a trained counselor, facilitator kind of person, that sometimes those tools can stir up feelings or open up parts of ourselves that we haven't really even bothered to think about. So that's what I think happens, is just life sort of just like buries old feelings, like just layer upon layer upon layer upon layer. And so when you start doing some excavating, just going, all right, tell me about, like, give me 3 words to describe your dad.
Yeah.
Give me 3 words to describe your mom. Tell me about some significant things that happened when you were a kid. What was that like? What was growing up like? And then you find yourself saying stuff that you're like, did I just say that?
Yeah.
You didn't even know was, so it's not like, hypnosis or something like this, but you're just by recounting some of there may be some realizations that you go, oh my goodness, that's why I've been so defensive, because I've been scared of this or that, or I didn't realize I've harbored a fear of whatever for a long, long time, or anger, or bitterness, or I've had some resentment for the longest time. I didn't even realize it until now. I think that happens all the time.
Yeah.
I think you journey with people through things like this, and I think, is that stuff that you see?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. I think there's so much there. And one of the most helpful tools I think I found, and you've done this too, I'm sure, is a genogram.
Yeah.
So it's like a family tree, but you're kind of identifying like, what are the qualities or characteristics of these people? How would I describe them?
How did your family think about success?
Yeah.
Who were the black sheep of your family, and why?
Yeah.
And what you find out is like, oh, wow, I've been really some of my views, even about myself. In fact, so I'll give you one. It's just, for me, I came from a home that was my mom is very neat, very clean. And, it was just it was a good thing. I don't have any, but there were certain expectations in our home that things would be kept a certain way. Heather is not wired up the same way. She's not a slob, but she's just not that same way. I carried in me for a long time feelings of like a certain tightness in my chest when our house didn't look a certain way and people were coming over, maybe especially family. And no one's ever judged us. My parents have never said anything about any of that, but I felt it. And one day, after I'd realized all of this, my dad was coming over to have a conversation, and I had left some stuff out. And when I knew he was coming over, I just went into like scramble mode. I started cleaning and all this stuff, and I was like, and I realized what was going on, and I was like, you know what? No, I'm not going to do it. Not to say, in your face, Dad.
Yeah.
Not
Not being disrespectful at all.
Not a bit. It's not even about him. It's about me. It's like, I'm going to be all right.
Yeah.
With this. This is where our house is at. And I'm not going to allow myself to feel shame or embarrassment because we live in a different way. That's how they live. This is how we live. It's okay.
Yeah.
It's called differentiation. It's a good thing.
Yeah, that's
and
what I was
it,
thinking.
right?
Yeah.
And it's like, so those are like little lessons I've had to learn to go, okay. And here's the thing. You might go, well, that's no big deal. Just clean up. But I would say, man, do you know how many fights I've had with Heather where I am venting borderline like anxiety and embarrassment and shame on her because of how I feel?
Yeah.
Instead of, let's just dial it down and relax and recognize that this is not the end of the world. It's okay. That Dr. Neiman has a great exercise that a lot of people have had to do where it's like they have to take Cheerios and pour them out in their living room and leave them there for days and not clean it up. And he's like, it's amazing how revealing that is to people, because what do you do with a mess? What do you do when things aren't right? How will you respond? Can you live with it? And and I think a lot of that ties back to family stuff. So anyway,
before we move on, I want to make sure that we define what differentiation is, just
cool.
for if someone's listening and they're like, "What is that?" It is this ability to maintain an individual identity and sense of like okayness and stay relationally connected to people at the same time
when they're different. So it's not letting the preferences, perspectives, and opinions of other people around you so kind of burden and impact you that you begin to adjust and change everything about yourself just to make
them okay.
Yeah. And you really feel this with your family.
You do.
Because it's amazing while in your family, it's like you can be one person with everybody else, and then you get back in your family and you
so
slide
crazy.
right back into the same role that you've always had in that family. And so learning to be, and that's a lot of what I've had to learn how to do, is just be a differentiated person. And I love you, I'm respectful, but also I'm different than you. And that's okay.
And it's amazing how much better you can love them when you're able to do that.
Yes, that's exactly right. 'Cause you're not as resentful any longer because you're not Because what you end up doing is resenting them
Yeah.
for who you are.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or who you've become, or who I feel like I have to be in your presence.
Yeah.
Yeah, no fun.
So we talked about romanticizing too. You talked about romanticizing the past. Anything you want to say about that besides that you missed the 90s?
Well, I think it's easy. I don't know if you do this, but to me, the older I get, the more I find myself longing for a world that doesn't exist anymore. I don't know if you're that way or other people are that way, but I do.
I mean, I don't find myself longing for it. I do have. I'm more nostalgic than I was when I was younger. I prided myself on not being nostalgic at all, just kind of like, oh yeah, whatever. But now I think back to the 4 years where I was at K-State, and I'm just like,
yeah, that's what I'm talking about. You have good memories.
That was wonderful. I enjoyed it. I had this level of freedom that, I probably didn't appreciate as much as, I would now. It was, So I do that.
Yeah,
for sure.
I do that too. And and I'm not sure that there's anything wrong with that, but I do think when it slides into sort of romanticizing where basically we're trying to get back to, it's like trying to recreate a great party that happened once and you just can't do it. It's the second time's never the same. And it's like it happened and it's good. And so there's nothing, in fact, scripturally, we're told to remember again and again and again.
Yeah.
But also anytime I think the people of God just park somewhere and want things to be just as they always were, it doesn't go well. Because there is this forward momentum to a life with God.
Yeah.
And so, I don't know that I've got anything more to say about it than that, but that's
my favorite line was, when you are looking more out of the rearview mirror than the windshield, there's a problem.
Yeah, there's a slow death coming.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think effectively, here's what I could say. I think effectively, when we start pining more for the past than we're living for the future, I think we, like Abram's father, Terah, are settling in a place and are effectively dead there. We're trapped back there and unable to move forward. Man, and I sympathize with a lot of older folks who are witnessing a world that's changing so rapidly, and it probably to some degree feels like the rug's been pulled out from under them. I think my advice and admonition would be to not live the rest of your life, though, in fear of the future and in a nostalgia for the past, but to really embrace that God can, will, and is moving now. And though I feel like a stranger in a strange land, which is so much of the Old Testament particularly, it's really so much of the story of the people of God. Abraham traveling to a land he doesn't know, Moses finding himself raised in Egyptian culture. There's so much of it, the story of exile, Daniel in Babylon. There's so much of that story in the Old Testament of the people of God feeling like strangers, outsiders. You're part of a long history of that. So I think just embracing it and saying, not embracing culture as it is, but saying, but I'm not going to let myself just kind of take a back seat, do nothing, and sort of watch from the sidelines, which is to, in my view, effectively not contribute anything. And you're like, Tara, you're just dying there, but rather to jump in and engage, even through the fear and uncertainty, probably insecurity of it all, feeling as though maybe you don't have anything to offer. I would say, no, don't do that. I think we have a generation that needs you. And I think if you will, in humility, and also, here's the thing, and this is something, I think this can go both ways, by the way, is that if our mindset, for the people that God's placed in our lives, if our mindset, and I heard Ray Ortlund say this, and this helped me so much, if our mindset is to correct them, instead of kind of lovingly cheering them on toward where God is leading, I think that's in other words, if we're coming in as an older generation going, let me fix you.
Yeah.
I think it's the wrong posture.
Yeah.
I think what we want to do is be, and I think with the younger generation, it doesn't just only always ever need your applause. But if you're not willing to pat them on the back, if you're not willing to put your arm around them, smile at them, say, I'm proud of you, I think that's what a lot of them are longing for and really want that kind of relationship with someone older than them to say, man, I'm so proud of you. You'll eventually earn the right to say, hey, have you considered this, or what about this? But if our whole mentality is to show up and correct, I think people shut you down pretty quickly. And I think even pastorally, I've had to learn that too. I am pastoring a congregation that I did not build from scratch. And so if I show up to this job as let me fix, quote, everything that I see that's wrong, I think it's a terrible posture for a leader. I think the best way to come in is say, I am for you. And then and prove that over time. And I think over time you earn the right to say harder things increasingly. But yeah, it takes a different posture from the beginning.
Yeah, for sure. And then the last one was regrets. Regretting your past and just feeling like I messed it up too bad to make any difference here and now. So you're trying to pass off that baton early, maybe.
So I think there's an interesting, and I wrestled with this as I was teaching it this weekend, and it's probably it's a good space to try to bring a little bit more nuance to it. So if I make, like, there are certainly decisions that I could make right now that would disqualify me from ministry. No doubt. That's a real thing. I think what I'm trying to say is not that you could never do anything to screw up so much that God couldn't use you anywhere. I think no matter what you've done, where you find yourself, I think what I'm saying is that place is a starting point to keep moving forward with God in the right way. Do you follow what I'm saying? So it's like, no matter how much I've screwed up, I always will believe that there's like from that point and forward, you can embrace a tomorrow that God has for you. To say that wherever, like, I cannot move forward. I think that's the distinction, is that one version of regret says, I can't move forward at all because of what I've done. And I think what I'm saying is, no, you can move forward. And that might require repentance. That might require sitting out of ministry for a season. I've got friends, dear friends, who have had to walk through that very thing, a restoration process. Yeah. I think the belief is not that there shouldn't be any consequences because of the grace of God, but no, because of the grace of God, I can move forward. There may be some things I'm going to have to a process I have to walk through, but I can still move forward, and I should be moving forward. I think that's what I'm saying.
And I think sometimes that forward movement actually looks like you're moving backwards to a lot of people, like to somebody who has experienced some of the things that friends of ours have experienced. They have to, like, take some time to do some inner work to like really say, how did I get here?
Yes.
In order to go to the place that God might have for you in the future, you sometimes have to do some things that look like regression, but they're actually death to self in a kind of way.
Yeah, it's not about, and here's the distinction. It's not about proving to God that you can be used again. It's about allowing Him. I love the story that or the picture that Tim Keller gives from C.S. Lewis in I think it's in Jesus the King, it is, of Eustace, who finds the dragon's treasure and himself becomes a dragon. And he tries to rip off the dragon skin. He wakes up, he's a dragon. He tries to rip off the skin only to find that he's still a dragon underneath, no matter how many times he tries. And so Aslan, the lion, then shows up and says, let me do it. And he has these claws, and Eustace is terribly afraid of these claws. But he finally allows him to put his claws on him, and he rips the husk of the dragon skin off of him, and he becomes a boy again. But it's really painful. it's that. It's about healing you so that you can be useful for the purpose and work of God again, and maybe even more so, become your true self. So it's not about God saying, I need you to do some penance here before you can sort of earn your place back into the family, but rather there's something that's been destroying you. And if we don't deal with that, you're only going to do this again. And so but I think the distinction is, one says, oh, you've done, the debt you owe is greater than what you can repay. Therefore, sit down, shut up, do nothing. The other is, the debt's been paid, but there's some work that you're going to have to do in order to deal with some of the things that have been broken in you. And let's get healed so that you can be back on the road and moving. It's like, and moving forward again. And that's the idea. And so, so the grace of God is what qualifies us, not our record of righteousness, achievement, how many days without incident, right? I remember feeling that way as a young man, like having in my heart and mind sort of one of those how many days without incident, how many days without screwing up kind of calendar in my mind. And the longer that number was, the better I felt like I was with God. And rather than dealing with the real issue, I was just trying to avoid adding more to my debt. And I think that's the difference, is that God wants to deal with it so we can move forward. But he doesn't need you to prove it so that you're, or pay your debt back, because you've accumulated a sizable, sum here.
Yeah, man, that's so good. That's such a helpful perspective shift, I think, for a lot of people. So the last point was that what was it? So
the greatest journey of faith begins with the simplest act of obedience. And I was really motivated by Genesis 12:4, which is an Abram went as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. It's like, that's it. I mean, it's so simple.
It is very simple. What if, but man, okay. So what does that, what does that look like practically? How does?
Well, I think it looks different for different folks. But I think it's taking whatever small step of obedience is in front of you. And I should be careful, because a small step, I'm saying small, but for Abraham to do as the Lord commanded him is a massive step. But so not easy, but relatively simple. Go. Just go.
Yeah.
And so, okay, I mean, it's not hard to figure out
start
what that is
moving.
but to actually do it won't be easy.
Yeah.
And I think that can take lots of different forms and shapes with God's people. That's the thing. I think you have to be sensitive to the leading of the Spirit and what God's putting in front of you. For some folks, I meet people all the time in Next Move that we do. People will say, I've been putting this off for a long time. I've known I needed to do this. Or it could be, I've known I needed to come down and talk to someone and get prayer. It could be, if I had how many times do we pastors here, I've known I've needed to set up a counseling appointment for a long time. I've known I've needed to admit I'm an alcoholic or what for a long time. We all have that in our lives. It's like the simple thing that we've known we need to do, but we don't want to do. Chances are that's probably the Lord saying, hey, you should do this. You should do this, or you should stop doing. I've known I needed to stop doing that. I've known I needed to give up that I knew they were wrong for me. I knew that group of friends. I knew I didn't need to go out and do that. I knew it. And so many, we say that all the time. And it's like, but that's the simple act of obedience. It's like, you knew it, but did you act on it?
Yeah. Yeah. You need to do it, but there's an unspoken fear or an anxiety that you're unwilling to face at the time connected to that step.
Well, it's the same thing that Abraham's dealing with. Am I willing to give up what I know, which may not be all that great, but I know it. That's the thing. It's amazing the comfort that we find in what we know, even though what we know might not be great.
Yeah.
Am I willing to give up what I know, even though it's not great, for what is promised to be great, but I don't know it? It's new and it's not tangible yet. It's just a promise.
And there's a feeling of lack of control with it too.
What if
us.
it doesn't come through? What if this all gets screwed up?
Yeah.
I mean, can you imagine what God promised Abraham in chapter 12? He doesn't deliver until 25 years later. Imagine all the different points of doubt going, I know he said that. Did I imagine that? Is that real? Is he going to? Will he keep his promise? All this kind of stuff. To the point that by the time he gets to however old Isaac is, 17, 18, whenever he's asked to take him and sacrifice him, that he's convinced that God would resurrect him. And what I think is, and that shows up later in what, Stephen's sermon in Acts, or maybe in Hebrews. It's probably in one of those two. Hebrews 11.
Oh yeah.
Anyway, point being that that his confidence was so high that God would fulfill what he'd promised, that he was willing to, whatever he asks me to give up, I know that he will do exactly what he said he would do. So I can therefore trust him. The outcome will not be what it feels like. The outcome will be what he says.
Yeah. And it's because we serve a God who chooses to reveal himself to his people. And Abraham's confidence that God would come through for him grew over those however many decades that he had this intimate relationship,
and watched
this
it happen
covenant,
multiple times.
With God over and over
he didn't get there
and over
overnight,
again.
But it's through those small, and that's the cool thing is I think, and maybe particularly in this season for some folks, is an opportunity to take a small step with God that will pay massive dividends later. The biggest of which, the greatest of which will be your confidence in God will go up.
Yeah.
Because there's so many people, and I wish I would have taught this now that you're mentioning it. You weren't here this week and you couldn't help me talk through my sermon. But how many people within our congregation would say, oh, I remember when God asked me to do this and I did it. And now their confidence is so sky high. They're just and we're openly talking about, we're about to put some projects in front of people and ask them to give toward. And there's no hesitancy in them at all. They're just like, yeah, absolutely, I'll do that.
Yeah.
Not because you're asking, Whit, but because of what the Lord asked me to do, I will totally do because I've seen him come through time and time again. Yeah. Sky high confidence.